Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. The Fleming Museum of Art at the University of Vermont is once again open. Like many museums and art galleries, the Fleming has been closed since March because of the pandemic. For nearly 90 years, the Fleming has been a cultural treasure prized by Vermonters and visitors, as well as academics and artists. This fall's exhibition is entitled Reckonings, and it's unlike any show in the museum's history. The Fleming's 6-month closure gave the staff an opportunity to step back and think about the role the museum plays here at home, and also in the social, political, and cultural climate that's happening across the country. As the staff reflected, it became apparent that the Fleming had to change, that it had to reckon with its past in order to inform the present and make sure the future of the museum will be a welcome place for all. Fleming Museum curator Andrea Rosen begins our story talking about how staff conversations about social justice and racial equity opened up new ideas and perspectives as the museum was shut down.
We shut down in March like so many. The entire Fleming Museum staff was working from home and trying to figure out what the fall would look like when we knew so little. Didn't know yet whether UVM would return to an in-person semester, and if so, what would that look like? All of that was developing. So we wanted to be sure that as we planned a fall exhibition, that it would be one that would be easy to transition to an online-only format in case we were not in person, that it was one focused on our collection and therefore not taking a lot of financial resources that might then be wasted if we had to shut down again.
In addition to planning for the fall show, the staff had to make sure the museum met the standards to reopen in a pandemic.
The museum is taking the typical COVID protocols. We require masks. We ask you to keep 6-foot social distance. There are directional markers to direct you through the museum to avoid traffic jams, and there are indicators of the maximum capacity of each gallery and sanitation stations all throughout.
The 2020 fall exhibition is called Reckonings. Fleming staff reflect on the collection and our current moment. The show's title and its inspiration speaks for itself.
We really wanted to be responsive to our current moment. And we also wanted to feature our collection. We have this new online collections database on our website. Anyone can search it. And we wanted to celebrate that. And we thought about some way of having multiple people, multiple voices select works and write about how those works reflected their state, their response to what's going on in the world. And we thought we'd start with the Fleming Museum staff, including many staff who are not usually involved on the exhibition side of things. So selecting work and then writing labels that reflect their personal response to the artworks.
The first image you see as you walk into the exhibition was chosen by the Fleming's business manager, Stephanie Glock.
The piece that I chose is called Half-Inch Grid. And at first glance, it looks like a maze, to me at least. That is exactly how my life felt and still feels amidst everything that's going on in the world. Remote learning for me, having 3 children at home, medical fragility, systematic racism, the death of George Floyd, it kind of all happened at once, and everything just felt like uncharted territory in a maze. The difference between the piece that I chose and an actual maze is that there's a clear exit point, whereas in this piece there is not. There's vacant spaces that look like could be an exit point, but they're actually not. And that's how I feel like this has been. We're finding little workarounds to kind of move on with our lives as they once were, but it's not a true exit into the society that we were once part of.
The description labels accompanying each piece were written by staff members like Glock, with guidance from the Fleming Museum's curator of education and public programs, Alice Boone.
So often people were sharing really personal reactions to these works of art that let them talk about, feelings of isolation, depression, the kind of shame that intrudes on you as you are inside your apartment and you're sort of surrounded by all your laundry, because you're doing laundry all the time now. That was me. I was talking about myself there. So how do you tell that to people who don't know you in about 150 words? So it was really vulnerable work of like talking with people about those feelings and saying like, all right, let's work on this grief a little bit. Because of that relationship that you develop through talking about someone's writing with them, because it's really talking about their ideas, their personal feelings, and the things that they haven't necessarily had an audience to write for before.
The word Reckonings was a deliberate choice by Rosen and the Fleming staff as they begin to account for the museum's history.
Another thing the museum is working through is our long overdue response to the calls for racial justice and how we deal with the long legacy of white supremacy in the museum. And some of the works in Reckonings address that, and we're starting to think about ways we keep addressing that in the museum going forward, and we don't go back to the status quo. And there are so many ways that for white people we don't realize that white spaces can be unwelcoming, and I think that's certainly true of the museum. In the case of the museum, our collections are absolutely based in a history of colonialism. We have artifacts from all over the world that were collected. We often don't know the circumstances in which they were collected, but they could have dubious origins. But generally were collected in terms of this project of let us represent the world through the perspective of the university and the museum staff, who are of course mostly white, and are looking to kind of conquer and represent the world in this microcosm of the museum as if we could control the world. Another aspect of how we're starting to grapple with that is in our African gallery. We're going to be, which is really out of date, we're going to be rolling out these critical labels and quotes in that gallery, many from UVM students, talking about what in that gallery is really off, what in that gallery is representing that history of colonialism that we're dealing with.
Rosen chose 3 pieces for the exhibition. One questions the concept of the American dream, another recalls UVM's recent past, while the third reminds Rosen of her family history.
I chose 2 World War I era posters and a contemporary print. One of the World War I posters, it's about buying war bonds, and it says Americans all, and it has this list of kind of ethnic names, Eastern European names and Irish names, and so the groups of immigrants that were really kind of the hot button issue at the time. So it's trying to present this idealism of like, let's all unite. And it had me thinking about my family's history as Russian Jewish immigrants in the early part of the 20th century, how despite the message of this poster, there were a lot of exclusionary immigration laws at the time. But then also how my family has had the privilege of being able to assimilate. We were white and had the privilege of wealth and were able to assimilate into this like white American ideal, which is represented on the poster with this blonde, glamorous spirit of America figure. Whereas for Americans of color, that kind of assimilation is not an option so often. The other World War I poster is about recruiting student nurses. And I thought about how UVM graduated its nursing students early, but also how there's this severe nursing shortage because nurses are so underpaid, which was an issue in the strikes at UVM Medical Center a couple years ago. And how if we want to be so supportive of our essential healthcare workers, it'd be great to do that with actions and more than words. The other is a contemporary print by Luis Cruz Azacita. It's called Lotto, the American Dream, and it's a car surrounded by gold bricks with these like cartoonish version of suburban houses, and then these numbers all around, these sort of random numbers that sort of represent lottery numbers, but I guess I was thinking about them as like the numbers that represent geography, right? Zip codes, area codes, latitude and longitude, and how outcomes in this country, that access to the American dream, is determined by geography, and geography is entwined with race because this country is still so geographically segregated.
For Rosen and Boone, the exhibition's title represents action, a wake-up call for the staff who work here, the University of Vermont, and visitors to the Fleming Museum.
You know, that term Reckonings, that's the title of the exhibition, is such a crucial one because it's actually stronger, and it asks you to do something more than just reflect or respond. It actually says this is something that we've been putting off for too long. This is something that we actually have to like take a moment, and it's going to might be painful, It might bring up feelings of uncertainty or ambiguity. It might bring up conflicts between people, right? But it's all really necessary work to do. And I think that museums right now across the country, whether they are academic museums like the Fleming or gigantic museums like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, how are they going to reckon with that colonial history that Andrea spoke about? As museums are reckoning with their own legacies and with their own kind of futures, I'm really glad that the Fleming is taking part in those conversations, both internally as a staff, but also externally with their visitors.
I think one of the reasons this show so excites me is I feel like we're demonstrating something that we're often not that great about demonstrating, which is how art can be a way for us to examine our feelings and reactions and thoughts on our world and use that to communicate to others. So a really crucial piece of this is staff members writing about art that don't always write about art. And in fact, I mean, another really touching thing is many of them were very vulnerable and personal in what they shared. And that's just so moving. And so I'd love, in this time when the world is topsy-turvy, for people to come and see that demonstrated, that art can be this vector for thinking and communicating all that's going on with us.
Reckonings is on view now until November 21st. This fall, admission to the Fleming Museum of Art is free to all thanks to the generous support of the 1675 Foundation. And no reservations are necessary. Visit uvm.edu/Fleming for museum hours. As you heard in our story, if you can't make it to the museum in person, you can still browse the museum's collections online from their website. And that's our program for today. Once again, thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.